Welcome to Mishna study. We're up to Masechet Peah Perek Gimel Mishnah Tet. Over here, we're going to continue on the theme of Hakotev Nechasav Le'avdo. Right, a person is writing Shir Karka Kolshu. He left over a certain amount of land, so that's going to be the theme running through. But the Mishnah is going to speak about a different case of giving away possessions to his slave. Right, so a person writes Hakotev Nechasav Le'avdo Yasa ben Horin Shir Karka Kolshu Lo Yasa ben Horin. Rabbi Yosef Omer, Yasa. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Le'olam hu ben Horin, ad she'omar, hare kol nechasai netunim li'ish piloni avdi, chutz mi'achad miribo shebahem. So a person writes his nechasim to his slave. He writes his possessions off, he's gifting it to his slave. Yatsa ben Horin, the slave goes free. Why? Because he is part of the owner's possessions. So the owner basically just gave him his freedom. Right? He was once a possession of the slave, possession of the owner. The owner said, I'm writing away all my possessions to you. He was one of those possessions. Now he goes free. But Tanakama says, if he left any amount of land, right, in the contract as he's writing, he's saying, but I'm not going to get except for, a small parcel of land. Even if he actually points out, specifies the northeastern corner of my field, except for that small, piece, few 10 feet at the end, except for that one piece. Everything else, goes free, except that one piece of land. Over here, Tanakama says, Lo yatsa ben Horin, the slave does not go free. And why is this? Because we say, according to Tanakama, as soon as he makes a condition in the shtar itself, on the property in the shtar itself, he's basically saying, I am not giving all the land. There's going to be a piece of it that's not included. We say the same thing applies to the body of the slave. It's as if he made a condition on the slave itself as well, slave himself as well, and one of his evarim, his limbs, were excluded from the proper possessions, his possessions going free. So the whole slave went free except for the slave's pinky. That's how we look at it. And that's no good because we need a sefer kiritut. We need a contract or a book contract that's totally karet. It totally cuts off. It cuts all the entire relationship, all ties. There can't be any ties afterwards. And if the owner still owns the slave's pinky, that's not an acceptable freedom, and therefore the slave did not go free. So according to Tanakama, if there was any land that was excluded, so too one of the limbs of the slave was excluded, and therefore the slave doesn't go free. Rabbi Yosef argues, he says, no, he does go free. Now, I would just point out that I saw a lot of Gisaot in the Mishnah. If you open up, regular Mishnah, they don't have Rabbi Yosef Omer Yatsa. Rambam explains over here, Rabbi Yosef says he goes free because he holds like Rabbi Shimon, right? Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Shimon are not arguing, according to Rambam. He holds like Rabbi Shimon that says what? Rabbi Shimon says, no, he's always considered a ben Horin. He always goes free until the owner says, everything is going to my slave, except for 1/10,000th of my property. Now, if he says 1/10,000th of my property, over here he didn't say it's a piece of my a piece of my land, right? He said 1/10,000th of everything that I own. Now, what's included in that? The slave is included in that. So he's basically saying, I'm letting everything go to my slave except for 1/10,000th or 100,000th, whatever it ends up being, of the slave himself. Now, even if it's the fingernail of the slave that wasn't let free, we don't have a sefer kiritut. We don't have a something that really divorces the two, the slave owner and the slave. And therefore, in that case, and that would be the only case that the slave would not go free. But Rabbi Shimon would say that in the case of land, if he specified, I'm letting everything go to the slave except for this piece of land, then in that case, Rabbi Shimon would say that the slave would go free. That pretty much sums up this Mishnah. Halacha is not like Rabbi Shimon. Right? Halacha is like Tanakama. And any amount of land, right? Connecting back to the theme, Shir Karka Kol Shehu, right? Would actually hold the slave intact. Now, one more thing Rambam says, when we spoke about all these cases of the Shechiv Me'an last Mishnah, the person, who's on his deathbed, and a person who's writing off, the things to his children, and now he writes off his possessions to his slave, and he left any amount of land, right? Rambam points out that this is not just land. It's also metaltelin. That would be the same law. If he left his watch, right? Anything, he left his computer, whatever it may be, any movable object, that would also fall into the same category. Now, why then? Why are all these Mishnayot saying Shir Karka Koshu? He left land any amount. If we're not talking about land, it's also movable, tangible, movable objects. So why are we saying Shir Karka Koshu? So Rambam explains that we're saying this basically because of the Peah, right? When we started 2-3 Mishnayot ago, and we said Karka Koshu Hayevet B'Peah, any amount of land is needed in Peah, because we started with that. Migo the Tane Resha Karka, Tane Sefer Karka. So it's a Migo since we use the language of Karka in the beginning of the Mishnah, right? 2-3 Mishnayot ago. So too, we're using the same language as we continue through. But the halacha would be that even any metaltelin would fall under this category as well. That sums up this Mishnah. That finishes up Perek Gimel. Next Mishnah, we'll start Perek Dalet.